the agenda follows the same format, just kind of a quick welcome overview of what Arborist calls are. We'll do the research and implementation updates from Deirdre and myself on ZebraD and Zcash. And then we have this generic presentation slot where we talk about different topics. And today we're going to talk about at least one of the things is the potential network upgrade pipeline improvements, or NUP, if you've heard that term. So we'll be talking about that. And if we need to, if we're done early, we can wrap the call up. I've got 45 minutes for it. If there's something else that comes up folks would like to discuss, we can do that too. And then just kind of a wrap up at the end, the open announcements, audience comments, wrap ups, kind of all one little section, just anything that might be remaining. So let me go forward, not back. Just a reminder, Arborist calls, monthly calls at the protocol level. It's where protocol contributors and anyone interested in protocol development get together to discuss, timelines and the process, which we're talking about today, and specific protocol R&D efforts, new features, and any, kind of blockers, unresolved issues, things we want to chat about, follow up on the next call, perhaps. The purpose is to make protocol development accessible for a wider set of participants and to provide, it's kind of making it transparent for the community to see what we're discussing, what we're thinking about on the protocol side, and just get that out in front of everyone. Who can participate? Anybody. It's not just limited to ECC and the foundation. And in fact, we really hope we get other protocol teams interested in development, or individuals, doesn't have to be a team. But anyone interested in learning about protocol development can join the call. And if there's anything at all that anyone wants to present that's protocol related, you can just email me, Steven@electriccoin.co, or ping me through any other various means and just say, here's what I'd like to talk about, and we'll get you slotted in, when we have availability, which is usually the next month. We don't run with, such a deep stack of topics that it's going to be months in the future. So. And with that, turn it over to Deirdre to talk about ZebraD.
So a couple of the highlights from the past month, we merged in a bunch of implementations of sapling node commitment trees, sprout node commitment trees for joint split on Groth 16. We got a ton of nice test vectors out of Libra Zcash and Zcash to make sure that we are compatible with their implementation. So thank you for those. Some of this is translating a lot of our internal message layers between our asynchronous components into the right internal messages when we're receiving messages from the peer-to-peer network protocol. This is a lot of work, so if it's not very Zcash protocol specific, don't worry about it, but we were very happy to get that in. One of the things that we did add recently to our Zebra network library is a connect isolated method. So what this lets you do is you can pull in our Zebra network crate and then make a single standalone connection to the Zcash peer-to-peer network, so that you could do things like if you are creating your own transaction and with like a wallet or something like that, you can open a single connection and then send that transaction to the network and advertise it or send it to the mempool if you like. And I think that Kevin from the ECC is testing this out for us like now, or like he asked like last week, like, how can I do such and such a thing? We're like, well, we just merged this in, which may exactly solve your problem. So we are very excited about that and to get feedback on that. And then a lot of stuff about our state layer, which is very important for how we are building Zebra. If you're not familiar, our state layer is the last contextual checking of all the consensus rules. We have 3 different layers of how we're checking like that everything is correct according to the consensus rules for Zcash, the protocol. We have structural, which is basically like we can never represent an invalid transaction or spend description or block or any of that. And then we have like semantic verification. So we make sure that your signatures are valid and your proofs are valid and stuff like that. And then the very last step is, does this make sense with everything that we know about the state of the blockchain and everything that we know as a node, as like everything that we have been communicated and verified previously from the network. And then all of that is done before we commit it down to our state. And so we've been refining this design and iterating on it and writing code and then updating our documents and going back and forth to make sure that everything that goes through our state layer is like, that's the last line for finalizing everything that we know to be true. And this is just a lot of really nice work. So if you're curious about like the nitty gritty of like our rustful design and kind of async and all that stuff, that's all in Zebra. And then we are in flight for a bunch of stuff. The thing that I am working on right now is our transaction verifier service. So this is an asynchronous service that you can call. And where is it? I was just working on it here. Yeah. Where you give it a transaction and then you give it our Groth 16 batch verifier and you give it our async script verifier, and it will eventually verify your transaction absent of context. As I mentioned before, it'll make sure that everything is like a valid representation of a transaction and everything inside it, and that it makes sense semantically, that all the signatures pass, that all the proofs are verified by calling that async proof verifier. Oh, this is a bad view. This is a very work in progress, so there's just like a lot of errors here. This looks better. And then we're doing things like calculating the, your binding validating key by balancing all of your value commitments and all of that stuff. So a lot of the math to do this computation, to do all of the value balances and stuff like that, that also got merged in this week. But this is like a whole bunch of components that we've been working on for months, kind of finally coming together and putting all of the Lego blocks together to do our async transaction validation. And it's very exciting. It's like everything's coming together. That is big part.
I noticed there was something on the comments of that PR saying that you might not want to use batch validation. Why is that?
So at least for the signature batch validation, not for the proof batch validation. We might be punting on that for now, just so that we can like finish like our alpha release of consensus validation, and then all like the interface of how we call these async validators, these verifier services, will remain the same. Just under the hood, we could swap out like one by one signature validation with batch validation, because we have already done the math and implemented ed 25519 and red jub batch validation. That's in a crate, and if you want links to that, I can share. But we're just sort of doing it straightforward for now and seeing what the wins are of the batch proof validation and the async transaction and script validation, and everything else we're kind of leaving it as it is and seeing like, we think that'll be pretty fast just with that alone. And then like later we can be like, all right, now let's try the batch validation of signatures and see if that bumps a couple more ticks on the speed meter out of it.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Very nice. What do you have like an overall roadmap timeline, kind of first alpha type target date or anything like that? Yeah. Like
funny enough, we just updated our README to
okay, excellent. Okay.
We just put a bunch of words into our landing page README, which is literally the document in the root of our Zebra repository, with a big warning sign, because we had some people like last week being like, oh, I just tried to run this and it threw a panic, and I was like, oh yeah, it panicked because that's not implemented yet. But they didn't realize that this was still under construction. It is not completely validating everything on mainnet yet. Currently, we're trying to get our first alpha that will sync and validate mainnet by the end of this year. And then we intend to, in the next year after that, after we kind of let it settle a little bit, we are currently writing a more detailed plan about how to send money via Zebra. And it's not going to look the same. We may not be shipping a wallet, but we will be trying to ship a way for you to plug into Zebra and send money via it. Okay. That's the high level stuff. But we have many documents about designs, and then our project board of like all the things that we are trying to get done. But that is our high level target.
Okay, excellent. So Nathan had a couple of questions in the chat.
Great. I see his question, and I'll read it. +1 to alpha release before perfecting batch validations for signatures. Is there a plan to make a stateless CLI tool library for transaction validation? Seems like that would be handy for the same thing called semantic validation. Right. So our current idea of how you can interface with a Zebra node is literally with a client crate. And so it'll probably be a command line interface, but it's also going to be a crate that you can plug into whatever your implementation is. That will do some of that. We haven't spec'd out specific plans about like call this method, do this thing to get the thing you want. But it will be doing like almost everything we're already doing does that implicitly. So I can see us making it easy to implement this yourself if you are a Rust person, which is literally import our consensus crate, call this verifier service, and by calling it, you hand it a representation of a transaction and it'll reply to you, yes, this is valid, or no, it's not. Semantically, absence of chain state of context. Like you can't, that's very close to being doable right now, but making that doable from like a nice, easy interface so you don't have to write any code or call any methods for that. I think that's something we have to specifically plan out, but that if we do that, it'll be part of the Zebra client crate / API, whatever we do.
Am I audible?
Yes, you
Yes,
are.
you are. Good.
Sorry for my environment. I'm early to this co-working space and I can't figure out how to turn on the light. So I have a flashlight, it's kind of spooky. But yeah, so I've noticed like when using Zcash, I often want to do certain things that don't actually require any network state, but
Yeah.
the only way to do it with Zcash is to start up a node and wait for it to like sync and rescan or whatever. And so I keep wanting just offline stateless command line tools to do certain things like key management or checking transactions, trying to parse them, that kind
Makes
of thing.
sense. At the very least, when our standalone crate Zebra consensus is like has fully functional transaction validation or verification, you'll be able to call that very easily in a little Rust script if you wanted to do that, like in a few weeks. Even before we have like a client, like a CLI or whatever that we are planning to build. And it would be as simple as like you write a Rust file, you import the Zebra consensus crate, and you'll call a transaction verifier like .call, and then you hand it the transaction that you have created in your script, and it'll eventually give you a result. In a future wrapping a result saying like, yes, this is a valid transaction or not, independent of any state, independent of any network communication.
Yeah.
It's worth pointing out though that many of the more recent changes in rules are by definition contextual because they're dependent on network upgrades. So this is only
the structural and semantic validation rules.
Right.
So the part about, are you pointing to a tree state root that is a real one that everyone agrees is actually part of the main chain, that would not be checked because we need state to check that part. What it would check is, do the signatures validate? Do the proofs pass? Is it a well-formed transaction? All of that stuff. Do the scripts work? Do the scripts validate? All of that we would be able to check for you, and no network communication, none of that. That's what that would do.
So if for the sake of argument, I'd implemented my own network layer for some reason, but I wanted to use the consensus libraries from Zebra.
Yeah.
So what's the size of that interface between the network layer and the consensus?
The way we have done it is, so the way that all of these libraries that we are talking about, we are using them in our node implementation ZebraD, the actual binary. The way that we fit them together is we have services who are driving our network calls to get blocks, to fetch the next transactions and get, communicate things, and then serve calls from people trying to make requests of us. And as they come in, they will get verified. There are checkpoints, blocks, transactions, all the way down. And then when they are, all the other checks are done and they are, they pass, we try to save them down to state. We have a state layer, and that is also wrapped up in a crate if you want to check that out. And that will do the final contextual check based on everything we already know about the network.
So it's the state layer that does that check?
Yes, does the final contextual checks. So in theory, you could take just the consensus stuff and solve your own networking part and solve your own state stuff if you want, and just it's an async request response like interface. So like so state is all of these verifiers are doable without that. You can call them directly if you want in your code. So it's literally like wherever you get those transactions from, you just call this directly, and it's like a block verifier service, and by service I mean it's like a function, and you give it a representation of the thing that is the method, the argument to this instance of a function call, and then it'll return a future, and then that future will eventually resolve to a yes or no result with an error if it errors out about whether the block verifies or the checkpoint verifies or the transaction verifies and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So the interface is quite small for these.
Is the interface dependent on Tower, or is it just a pure functional interface?
It is dependent on it's dependent on Tower stuff. What's the other one? Let me go look just to make sure I'm not saying anything.
Sorry, I don't want to take too much time.
Sure.
I just want to understand how it's layered.
Yeah, Tower, Tokyo, and futures and stuff like that.
Okay,
Our current consent.
That's such a small dependency list.
Yeah.
Wow.
I
like
our consensus crate currently depends on Zebra State, but you can use a lot of the stuff in here without ever needing to do state stuff if you don't want to.
Okay, thank you.
I see each service is a Tower service, right? Yes. So if you can see, I don't know if I'm still screen sharing, but for example, this is our block verifier. The verifiers are they're consuming service type thingies. So I'm probably not the best person to explain this, but like each service itself is not really, it's sort of. That's a bad way to answer it. Nathan asks, every Tower service is trait-based, so it's possible to provide any alternative implementation for any service. Yes, basically.
That's a really nice feature.
Yeah, right. So yes, all of our verifiers are implementing literally Tower service. And its Tower service is very lightweight. Tokyo is the Tokyo runtime and lets us do all this stuff async in the nice way, but the Tower service itself is quite a light kind of abstraction. But yes, we're building a lot of stuff on this model of services around just all over the place. Cool. Any other questions before I take up?
To what degree are the functions that those futures delegate to the very low level validation pieces that are synchronous available for external use? Do you always access them via futures, or can you access them synchronously?
The very lowest level, basically, of the dispatch tree. For example, the way that we're doing the Groth 16 validation verification without batching is basically a call out to Bellman at the bottom. It hasn't been merged in yet, but we have an open PR. And it's just basically like, you have a block, it's comprised of transactions. Okay, dispatch an async transaction verification call for each transaction in the block. And then inside that transaction verification call, it's like, I need to do an async dispatch to a sync verifier service and to the batch validation service. Those implementations inside themselves figure out the best way to handle that request. In our first iteration, it'll be just like, okay, this makes a call to Bellman, this makes a call to Bellman, this makes a call to Bellman. But for the stuff that implements batching, it'll be, okay, we're going to fill up a queue of requests for a bunch of red jub signatures or a bunch of ed25519 signatures. And then when we fill up our batch, we batch validate all those signatures with the optimized math. And then eventually all those requests, all those features will get completely fulfilled and give you a result like all in one go, basically. And then just like the whole call tree just resolves itself.
Where is the actual call to Bellman in the code?
Oh, we haven't merged it in yet, but I'll show you our current PR. It's way down here. We have to come back to this because I'm calling this, but it doesn't exist yet. So my verification is just very sad.
So what's modified in Bellman? It's
I don't think we are currently.
You're currently relying on a fork, but I think those changes have all been merged because this PR started quite a while ago. So I think you can probably migrate to upstream Bellman now.
I think that's correct. This is currently doing all the batch stuff. So literally batch verifier is
this is setting up a channel or setting up a thread to do the verifications and then
under the hood okay. It is the Tokyo runtime is doing if it needs to set up a thread, it sets up a thread under the hood, but that's not exposed to us as the user of its API. So when this is like an implementation of the batching. So Bellman has exposed on our branch the batch verifier. And then what this does is when you call this Groth 16 verifier service, this is the call method, and it literally invokes the batch, say, I have a new item for you to queue up in your batch. And then it tells it what to do. This channel, this is basically a channel to notify that, oh, we've eventually reached our size of the batch. And then we're going to do the validation, the verification as a batch. And then we're going to notify you that it's flushed and that you can update your state, basically. And then, yeah, that's the flush part. And then this is the actual call to Bellman.
So you have modified Bellman to add a batch API. Does it actually work, or does it? Or I mean, it works, but does it actually do batch verification, or does it like simulate it?
I don't recall. I think Henry was the one that did this, but I can go see. Actually, let me double check that. Where's it coming from? The right branch. Yeah.
This would be on your repository.
Yeah.
Oh, did we fork it? I'm sorry. Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm.
It'd be in Verifier.
Yeah, there it is. Yeah, so this is the thing we actually call.
If you just do a compare of that with upstream, how big are the differences?
So it's not fully implemented because there's something unimplemented.
Okay.
But there is some math in here.
Yeah.
No, I can. Yeah, I can recognize some of that math.
So I think either way, we're keeping the API the same, and then under the hood, the batch verifier can either actually do batch arithmetic or not. It can just dispatch. And then all we have to do is just swap out some math for that dispatch call, which is basically what we literally did for ed25519 and redjub. We had them just straightforward and then calling those signatures by themselves. And then we're like, oh, look, we did some math, and we just swap out the call inside the verifier service and inside the batcher.
Cool.
Yay.
Can you just do that compare? From
Diff
your
this
batch
to diff this to the thing. Hold on. This is.
If you go to the root, there was a since. Yeah. Compare at the top there.
Just click compare there then.
This is just ours. So if there's been updates.
No, I understand what it's showing.
Okay. Come on.
I think some of this has already been merged.
Right. So yeah, this is like
I don't think we haven't merged any batch stuff.
Yeah, the verification error stuff I recall being merged. The batching on top is new.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's mostly a lot of like this interface kind of not syntactic sugar, but like a lot of boilerplate to get this async batch verification API all nice, and then just a little bit of extra math at the moment.
When you've implemented that stuff that isn't implemented yet, can you ping me and Sean so that we can check the math?
Absolutely.
Check the implementation of the math.
Great. Any other further questions? Yay! Okay, let's let Zcash D talk.
Thank you for that update.
Yeah.
Deirdre's like, I didn't know this was a Zebra D pairing. I thought it was the Arborist Call. Can you run a diff there? What did we merge?
Sorry.
No, it's
enough
fine.
really enough to talk about? It's going to fill the time.
Right. No, exactly. I like this kind of format where it's like, let's talk about what's important, and drill in where we need to. So, okay, let me get my screen back up again. We'll move through Zcash D pretty quick. Can everyone see the slide deck again?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Yep. So we'll move through this pretty quick. FYI, as everyone knows, Canopy is going to activate in about 40 days on November 18th. FYI, we covered last time, and everyone, is very aware of the zips in there. Won't go through those in any great detail. Main thing is the Zcash Development Fund, the Dev Fund, will become active in U4. So looking forward to that. A huge item, and I know everyone on this call is most likely aware, but yeah, Gemini announced support for shielded withdrawals, which is the first regulated exchange to do so, which is a phenomenal milestone for the entire community. So worth pointing out for folks that might watch the call later that may not be aware of that. So that's excellent. General announcements, yep. Gemini announces the shielded withdrawals. We had done the implementation audit for Canopy in U4 sometime back. That got published since our last call. Dodger did an excellent write-up on a FATF review and response, and that's kind of a regulatory thing around, certain organizations looking at, should we regulate peer-to-peer transactions? So read that. These are all linked off our blog, by the way. And then with the exception of the last one, which is the live stream that we did where we kind of go through some marketing and engineering, and that's on our YouTube channel. So be sure and check that out if you'd like more info.
What does FATF stand for?
Does anybody know off the top of their head? I know Dodger does, and I know he's on the call.
I think it's Financial Action Task Force.
Okay.
Yeah, let's see. Somebody in
Brad
chat.
confirmed.
It's
someone in chat says Financial Action Task Force.
Right. Okay, excellent. Thank you for that.
Thanks.
So let me get back into presentation mode. Yeah.
yeah, just for context, FATF is like an international organization that issues recommendations that countries then implement. And yeah,
cool.
It usually is very consistent with the US regulation. That's my understanding.
Yep, very good. So yeah, the key there is, you know, the team does a really good job of keeping their eye on anything developing, make sure that the voice of, you know, the crypto community, Zcash in particular, is heard, so that they understand, you know, that we're in fact regulatory compliant, and we don't get lumped in with other coins that consider themselves privacy coins, which can't do the same. So. In terms of Zcash D status update, a few highlights from the past month. We published a number of zips. A really key one is zip 321, payment request URIs. We've been working with a number of wallet providers, Zec Wallet, Aditya at Zec Wallet, and Aditya at Nighthawk Wallet as well, as some other folks on that. Excellent. And then we published 3 other zips as well: zip 300, cross-chain atomic transactions, zip 304, sapling address signatures, and zip 400, which was just named wallet.dat format. I believe OX Arbitrage submitted that one. Made really great progress on Halo 2. We published some preliminary benchmarks in the live stream. That looks really good. We created the Sensimilla hashing algorithm, which I always ask this and forget, but it's a derivative of Peterson. Is that correct, Dara?
Yes, you can reduce the security of Sensimilla to the security of Peterson.
Okay, excellent. And then just yesterday, I believe if I get my days correct, Ying Tong and Dara presented a Halo 2 deep dive at Zero Knowledge Seoul.
Nice.
And Zero Knowledge Seoul, they had a study club. They themselves had a study club prior to the session to walk through the Halo paper, so they'd be a little more well-versed. So that recording is up on YouTube. And someone I'm sure can put the link in chat for anyone that might want to see that. We're also going to get it on, try to get it on our YouTube channel as well.
Great.
In terms of Zcash D, we updated almost all of our dependencies, including 0MQ. We removed some cryptographic dependencies on OpenSSL and Libsodium.
Yes.
And then we moved to a refactored implementation, or moved to refactored implementations of BLS 12381 and JubJub.
So, Strad, did we completely remove Libsodium or just?
No, we're most of the way there to collapsing our dependencies to be coalesced around the Rust dependencies. The remaining dependency is on. I think we have some dependencies in note encryption still for doing note decryption,
right.
And then we use Libsodium for consensus verification of their 25519 signatures.
Yes.
And we will be retaining that until Canopy activation.
Yeah, I think Libsodium will be gone completely after the release, after Canopy activates, probably.
Yeah. At that point,
that's what I'm hoping.
Yeah, our only cryptographic dependencies then will be the ones that are internal that we inherited from Bitcoin Core, and then the variety of Rust crates, which is what we're trying to move towards.
And hopefully we can even remove some of the internal ones.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if Zebra is able to implement consensus compatible node purely in Rust, then we should be able to do as well.
All right.
Well, to be fair, we had to wrap up the script verification, which is C, because we did a little bit of analysis of how much work to do it all in Rust, and it was non-trivial. So we're just like, okay, we need to just get this.
Yeah, that one's a bit of a Rust-a-ducking.
Yeah.
The Bitcoin devs are right. Implementation is specification. It's all fine.
All right, very good. Good grief, I'm going the wrong way on this thing. Okay, here we go. So we also have internally a PR gardening initiative. We wanted to get a little bit better handle on open PRs, you know, some of our own, some obviously a lot submitted through the community. I won't go into the detail of all these numbers, but in Q3, we put forth a pretty distinct effort to reduce the total. So across Zcash, Libra, Zcash, and Zips repos, we started the quarter with 136. Instead, I realized my numbers may be off by a couple. I think it's because of how I ran the GitHub queries, but
time zones.
yeah, exactly, probably, right? Yeah, so we started with 136 open at the beginning of the quarter. We opened an additional 127 for a total set we were working with of 263, and we ended the quarter with 84 open. So we closed, you know, 185 PRs in the quarter, which is roughly about a 38% reduction over where we started the quarter. So anyway, making pretty good progress. That's been a really fun initiative as well. So just a little bit of an update there. In terms of just, you know, kind of general timelines and what's up next, we're right here at the dotted black line. The next thing we'll do is put out release 410 Zcash D roughly mid-October, probably closer to the 19th. Release 310 will EOS halt right around the 1st of November. And then, of course, Canopy will activate on November 18th. So those are kind of the upcoming next items from a release and network upgrade perspective.
And fun upcoming milestone, in approximately just a bit under 3.5 hours, we will hit block 1 million.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep.
That's a good
I think it's like
Amazing.
180 blocks time or so, or was it 120 blocks?
Yeah.
385, yeah, 120 or so blocks.
1 million blocks. That's awesome. All right, very good. Okay, so that gets us through the Zcash D update. I can't see the chat. Any questions anyone has at this point on Zcash D before we kind of move into the NUP discussion? Nope, looks like everybody's good. Okay, so proposed NUP changes, and this is kind of open discussion. To recap, we had, I'd actually meant to present this at the July Arborist Call.
Oh, wait. Sorry, I do have a Zcash D question. Who should I talk to about the Cling stuff?
It's
Zebra?
Dara and me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, on our team.
Okay.
I was just curious.
For context, we're attempting to migrate Zcash D to pin Clang as a compiler across all platforms, where currently we depend on GCC on most platforms and Clang for macOS. That obviously has benefits from just like we understand what the compiler is doing. We can be more confident in what it's doing and its optimizations. And also then we can do like fun cross language optimization stuff.
Yes.
And it's a better compiler.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions on Zcash D before we move on? Okay, yeah, so in terms of like proposed NUP changes, improvements, I know I'm going the wrong way again. Just a little bit of background. There's a couple of resources. One is the ECC's initial blog post on the NUP, which is sometime back. It's linked out of here. And then the NUP version 1 is that really really detailed diagram that I'm sure everyone's familiar with. I'll put those links in chat in just a moment so everyone has them as well. But the question is, well, why do you make changes to something in general? Well, it's to make it better, of course. Specifically with the NUP, we hope to create a more agile kind of streamlined process. But at the same time, there's a lot of great things we've learned in following the NUP or attempting to follow the NUP in some cases. At least it's been kind of a guiding force, if you will. And the safeguards we're talking about is like not compromising or cutting corners on testing, implementation audits, partner adoption, those kind of things that make each network upgrade successful, because that's ultimately what we want out of any process, is to produce a network upgrade that is secure and successful from an ecosystem perspective. And then also a goal, just like the goal of these Arborist calls, is to make it easier for protocol teams outside of ECC and the foundation to participate. And that's what we're really hoping to see. And the reason that we started kind of these open protocol calls on a monthly basis was to encourage people to get involved, or to at least see how they could get involved if they so wanted to. We had a few specifics that we thought would help. So just to kind of throw those out, there's a zip review begins as kind of a milestone. The reality is zips are always being reviewed. Deirdre and Dara do an excellent job with that, and the community does as well in terms of commenting on zips and putting new zips in. So there's no specific, zip review opens type milestone. It's just kind of a continual thing. We thought too there was an opportunity to compress some timeframes in here. So the first one is reducing the time between, quote, draft zip submission deadlines. And by the way, the things that are in bold are, kind of milestones that were called out in the first NUP, I think it's NUP 1.2, the diagram. Decrease the time between draft submission deadline and feature selection from 2 months to 1. 2 months was really quite the long period of time. And another key is we want to stay kind of true to whatever timelines we think make sense without being horribly rigid. So if you're a month and if you're a day less than a month, let's be okay with that. The next one is kind of key. A feature prototype should be done on at least one consensus node to be considered for feature selection. And the caveat there, is, it should be running somewhere, right? So, it's like, okay, here's what it is, here's what it does, here's the implementation. The next item, and this is what I was talking about on the prior slide, anything that's selected for a network upgrade should be included in the specification implementation audits. And I would say with the asterisk, I should have added that to this slide, of, if something's running alpha and it's simply like, maybe like the first cut of ZBRD, like syncing the blockchain and doing some validation, it's not like, ready for mining prime time, if you will, then, that an alpha level type deployment should be fine without that. But obviously before it goes, beyond alpha, any protocol feature, by the way, not just a full consensus node, but if another team comes up with, hey, here's a great protocol extension and we'd love to implement this, what do you think? And we're like, wow, it's great. Let's get that audited. And when I say let's get that audited, it's like, hopefully it will, they will come with the understanding of they've got to take care of that, the audits themselves. Prototype and test vectors complete should include the features that are running in testnet. So you should have the test vectors with that. Invariably, when you go through an audit, you wind up with, either the specification or implementation audit, you wind up with some feedback from the auditors that say, oh, wow, if you'd word the zip this way, it would better reflect the actual implementation. So you get some tweaks to the zips and the specs out of those. And those are fine to make after that period of time. And then the last one is more of a compress the time frame down for partner adoption, which is essentially the amount of time that the implementation spends on testnet prior to mainnet activation. Kind of the reality in practice is, is if you make the investment in ecosystem outreach, and it's not just like, we hope they all stumble into it at some point, but it's a really proactive, like, let's call them and tell them this is happening and stay on them until we get confirmation they're on the right release and they've upgraded and they're ready to go. There's no reason that needs to be 5 months. So it's like, 3 months is probably reasonable.
But by the way, it's about 3 months for Canopy between.
So roughly. Right. So I believe, so that was, that's it from a, the slides I had. I do have the NUP up here just for if anyone's like, what is this NUP and this process? But it's, it's this kind of network upgrade pipeline process that was laid out, and you can go look at it and see the details of the different milestones. And again, the ones I had referred to in the slides that were in bold were specific milestones on this chart. The original blog post I mentioned is here, where it kind of said, hey, this is kind of what we're thinking. That was authored by Nathan. So you have the author here in the event there are any questions. But at that point, I will, I don't really have anything else to share, so I can stop sharing my screen. That way I can see everyone in the chat again. And I know Deirdre, we had
Thank you, Stephen.
I think,
Go
Nathan,
with questions,
Oh, well, I had 2 comments about the NUP changes slide. One was the last bullet said partner adoption and was lowering that window. But I'm kind of on this kick where I want to see all of the Zcash developers put more effort into following up on adoption after things activate. And so that bullet, partner adoption, is more about like helping partners prepare for activation. And then there's a separate thing I would like to improve on, which is helping everyone follow through on features, like especially making sure we can monitor if they're being used. If it's something like mining to
privately monitoring if they're being used.
I guess it depends on the feature, but like something like mining to the shielded Coinbase mining thing is already like a public feature. I mean, it's publicly visible, but is there actually infrastructure that lets people see when it's happening and things of that nature? So some of that monitoring, I think, could be public.
You could do some kind of telemetry thing, private telemetry thing with even private features. It's complicated and it would need security auditing, but it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
There's also like heuristic monitoring as well of like, you know, if we're pushing out stuff, are we getting developers leaving issues on like, this doesn't work, which is a good proxy for they're trying to do something with it.
Yes,
right.
That is a non-private, volunteer-based monitoring.
Yeah. Or like,
and in some cases,
right, if there's
in some cases we know that a feature isn't being used because there's no code that actually implements part of it. So an example is Fly Client. There is no Fly Client support in wallets, even though the consensus part of it is activated, is activated in Heartwood.
Right.
Anyway, so that's one thing. The other thing is the diagram. I like the fact that it's kind of pretty and it fits on one screen, but I wish it was in a format that was more like possible for people to make pull requests to, basically, or if there was a separate
I think we should totally
form.
redesign that diagram because it's too busy and difficult to follow.
And also one problem with it is I feel like we've pasted this URL that's like this really long opaque URL, and that's the only place. Like it just appears sometimes in talk, but it doesn't feel like it's like a easy to comment on or edit or collaborate on.
That URL is because I literally like screen capped someone's like screen share of that in a previous call and then pasted it into a GitHub issue, and now it's being hosted by GitHub. So, but I agree about that.
So another thing about that diagram is that there are basically 2 copies which are different because of Christmas, essentially. And I think the timeline should not be specified in sufficient detail that Christmas matters, because it varies a month or so anyway, depending on when the last upgrade was. So that's not something that we can predict.
Right, and well, that diagram was specific for like, you know, 2 specific network upgrades, as opposed to here's a generic, here's a generic pipeline. Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And it makes it look more complicated than it actually is.
Yeah, I remember, sorry, I will not segue long, I promise. I remember when I first started, Nathan and I were in Denver, and we were talking about the NUP, like my first week, and there's a huge poster in the conference room in Denver of the NUP, and Nathan's like, yeah, Stephen, I want to get your help on, you know, reworking the NUP. And I looked at that poster and I'm like, first of all, internally, I'm like, you got to be kidding me, but I'm like, I have a lot to go to learn. So, but anyway, sorry, little story I had to share. But anyway, so Deirdre, background, we had the foundation community call a few weeks ago now. I can't remember, and we kind of started this discussion there. So, you know, I'll kind of turn it over to you if you want to highlight some things from that call that you want to discuss and bring up. Then
I just dropped a link into the chat of notes
okay.
that came out of that call. I think that call
perfect.
is also recorded. I don't have the link handy, but I think it's on the Zcash Foundation channel on YouTube. That call was basically like, okay, we have the NUP as Stephen has described it a little bit, and also those are some of his or the ECC's kind of like tuning iterations for the NUP as it currently exists. But that call was also more about like, what would we like this NUP to be? What do we actually need it to do for us? How would we actually like it to work? What things can we leave out? What things do we want to add? How do we actually ship changes to the protocol and to our software? What things need to be part of the NUP versus need to be part of Zcashd or ZebraD's software release cycles and things like that. So some of the kind of high level things that we talked about were basically like, we currently encode 2 network upgrades a year, whether that's like from April to April or from the end of the calendar to the top of the calendar. And it's been 2 in every 12 months, even if they get moved out by a couple of months. And sometimes that because of, for example, you go from overwinter to sapling, and there was a ton of stuff in sapling, and then the thing immediately after sapling is like light because everyone's a little bit tired and burned out, and you've shipped a ton of stuff. And then
there wasn't actually one 6 months after sapling. It was a year after sapling.
Or yeah, okay. Well, from one network upgrade to another, and then the one after, I think it was the one immediately. Was it Blossom? There was immediately after sapling.
Nope, that was the next upgrade, yes.
Yeah, and then the one after Blossom was like a little bit more than stuff that was in Blossom, but like
Heartwood.
Yeah, TLDR, some network upgrades have more stuff in them than others, but sometimes my idea or one idea is that we don't necessarily have to have a network upgrade just because it's like the next 6 months from the last one, if we don't necessarily have anything to go out. We talked about that. Some people have disagree, but I think it's something that we should think about a little bit more as a community and as application and protocol developers. Another thing is I think I mostly agree with all of the proposals that Stephen proposed, the like kind of smoothing out and loosening some of these like specific deadlines about ZIP proposal and implementations and prototypes and stuff like that being available. I have another thing. Yes, Sarah?
I was going to ask, was there anything that you disagreed with in what Stephen said?
I think the only thing is the strict requirements on audits from ZIP proposers, because we've had good ZIP proposers that I don't know if they would be able to make an audit or pay for an audit.
I wasn't sure about that either.
Yeah, for clarification, like a zip could come from anywhere, right? Like just a community member could say, this is a phenomenal idea, we should do it. But maybe they may not even be a developer, you know, they could just have a phenomenal idea. So I don't think, I think whoever picked that zip up and actually planned to do the implementation is kind of, you know, you kind of be on the hook at that point if you're implementing it for an audit. So that was how we would see that.
I think one way you could probably address that would be like, let's say you have someone comes up with a cool idea, doesn't know how to implement it, doesn't have the resources to audit it. They could ask for a grant to hire someone to do it.
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Or a major whatever. Yeah.
And we could.
And we're already seeing out of MGRC that they want to start prioritizing, you know, security audits and things for stuff, the work that's coming out of them. So, so that makes sense. There's also there's also something to consider about the value of individual audits for the individual zips being proposed. I would tend to think that there's better value in focusing the audits on collections of things that we're considering deploying.
I totally agree. That's how we've done it in the past, and it's worked very well.
Yeah,
you need a lot of auditors to see interactions between.
Yeah, there's no such thing as too few audits. Like if people want to get zips audited before we consider them, or perhaps if there's a zip that we're looking at and going, this is a bit risky, it's untested or whatever, or there's something going on, like we want to submit to additional scrutiny, sounds fine. But I wouldn't think that putting a requirement on audits before we select them is necessary for the process.
No.
Auditing before they get into Zcash the protocol, yes. Like I think that should be a baseline for what ECC and Zebra consider Zcash is. Like if we're going to deploy something, it should have been through a spec audit.
That dovetails with another proposal that originated with our founder's executive director, Josh Cincinnati, about making the explicit selection of zips that go into the network upgrade more visible via also the zip process. Because the way it currently works is, yes, there are a bunch of zips and all the editing and work on them is very visible in the community, but then the actual collection of zips that comprises the next network upgrade kind of like falls together in a network upgrade zip that kind of like just shows up somehow, somewhere, eventually. And so basically the idea is that a network upgrade type of zip would be worked on as we are picking the merged in zips from them to comprise and finalize when finally shipped on mainnet. The network upgrade zip would finally be finalized when it's actually deployed and activated on mainnet. And then to dovetail with that, we can basically say, we will only add these zips to the network upgrade zip and consider them for adding to network upgrade if they have the implementation and we have an audit for them. I think that would work nicely.
We have an audit plan for them anyway.
Right.
Yeah. Because like the network upgrade, you could phrase that as the network upgrade zip cannot be finalized without a spec audit. But you can also you can draft it and agree to like, this is what we're going to get in.
Yes.
So they're actually in the zip process. There are 3 states here. There's draft, proposed, and final. The final, by definition, is when something is activated on mainnet.
Yes.
So we're actually talking about the transition between draft and proposed.
Yep.
Nathan, you had a comment earlier. I saw your finger up.
Oh, yeah, I like this idea. And haven't we always had a zip specific to how to deploy each upgrade?
We've had a zip that specifies it.
We have, but Deirdre is right that in some cases it's just been plucked out of the air at the last minute because
we have
we didn't have one.
We have in more recent upgrades, like I know the last upgrade we did spend like we had a series of engineering meetings that we were running on, I think it was a monthly or bi-monthly basis, that we were working towards like figuring out what could go into the next upgrade, and that did include ECC and ZF, and I think it's meant to be open to more than that, but in practice, the only people I could persuade to come along were ECC and ZF people. But yes,
partly there was a backlog in the zip process, which Deirdre and I are getting on top of now. And in fact, I think it helps to have a sort of a recent change I made was to have stub zips for things that have an assigned number that we're pretty sure are going to be zips. So there is already one of those for the NU5 deployment zip, which is 252, I believe.
Right.
If we're more comfortable with like
253.
getting proposals out on like a branch or like even up on the zips page, it's like, here's a proposal, go talk about it.
It's 253.
Right. And a quick note, Deirdre has to drop off in about 9 minutes now, and so we'll be cognizant of that. And Nathan, I think you had your finger up again.
Yeah, it's so I like this idea of ensuring we do features, it's clear what the features are as a zip proposal. But I also want to keep pushing to improve the zip process. So one impression I have is that consensus about what zips become more mature kind of happens between our two teams or the editors with input from our teams. But it would be nice to maybe make it clearer to the rest of the community that when and that they could comment on them, especially for like a network upgrade feature selection zip. It'd be nice to sort of get it into shape and then get community feedback or comments on it.
I mean, they've always been able to comment on them, but not many have, because not many know that this is happening, or where to look on GitHub, or
or they may not want to comment through GitHub as well. We had discussions about that like sometime last year, and we did start trying to create a bit more of a process through like involving the forum as a locus for like initial development. We could like put a bit more emphasis on like trying to like synchronize between the two, perhaps, if there are people who feel more comfortable contributing or commenting in that venue.
I think actually that worked very well for the dev fund zips, because there were quite a few proposals that by people who sort of were not confident in creating an RST file as a zip.
One thing that Darren noted on that GitHub issue that I linked, that was just a summary of that community call that we had, is the everything that we've talked about does put a lot of power in the hands of the zip editors. We are both helping to shepherd zips, and we are helping to shepherd the zip that describes what zips go into the network upgrade. So that's a point to consider. So having more community involvement, like commenting on the zips of all the zips, that including the zip that is a zip of zips, is very good. But also, you know, if there are
necessary, because I mean, speaking as a zip editor, I don't want that power to be able to
right.
So and it's also worth.
Go ahead, Strad.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that like it's not just a power you have; it's also like quite a lot of work.
Yes.
To manage that.
But I'm doing that work anyway.
Yes, but like still, like the thing we noted about the dev fund zips, like I remember like spending significant parts of my dev time, you know, with Dara going through the forum zips and like, you know, doing the
huge amount of work. Yeah.
To get that, both to like help get these into zip shapes, and also to give the feedback on there were a lot of zips.
The decision about what changes go into a network upgrade it's really something between ECC and the Zcash Foundation. At the moment, both the only zip editors are from ECC and the Zcash Foundation, so that's fine. They can represent their respective organizations in that, action. But I think it probably, if we're going to formalize this, then, the decision or approval, or however you want to phrase it, of what changes go into a network upgrade should probably be specified as being, agreed between ECC and the Zcash Foundation, and that then mirrors the trademark agreement.
Right.
Because in principle, you could have a rogue zip editor.
Right. I trust Dara and Deirdre like wholeheartedly. So it's like, this is not a problem at all. But enshrining like another governance layer I don't think we want to do that. It's great to have to codify this.
We might have other zip editors in the future who aren't, who aren't part of those organizations.
I think part of the basically expose in the same way that developing each individual zip is public and the work is like very community visible. The idea, at least that inspired this, is we also want to make the selection of zips that goes into the network upgrade as visible, and not so much like encoding like, well, the ECC and the ZF shall, you know, collaborate on that selection. It's more of like, we are the zip editors, but however the zip editors are chosen, the zip, at least in this version, like feedback welcome about how to make it a little bit less zip editor centric. One idea I just had is maybe the MGRC has a voice.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because we do have, I think we have MGRC members who are interested in participating in the zip process. So
that would be wonderful.
I know that Hudson Jameson has been involved kind of in the similar process for EAPS in Ethereum.
If we got a zip editor rep from the MGRC and they can choose whoever it is, that would be wonderful.
Sarah Jamie Lewis was very keen on sort of the security aspect of deciding what goes in the protocol.
That would be great.
And I'm fine with all of that except deciding what goes in the protocol as a person, right? Like we have, again, I don't want to introduce a new governance structure that certainly additional zip editors would be awesome.
Well,
of course, it lightens the load on everyone, and it's great to have an outside perspective.
Currently, the zip editor's role, they're not supposed to. It's a little bit vague, but they're supposed to act as editors, and the role of an editor is not to make technical decisions. Now, in practice, that it does mean that we use our technical judgment because we have to, but we have to be somewhat restrained in sort of imposing our technical opinions on it.
Right.
And I want to be,
maybe we need to separate out the zip editing function from the protocol definition function.
Maybe. This was like a way to sort of take something that kind of already happens and make it like, okay, well, instead of making it implicit, let's make it explicit, which is like eventually the network upgrade is defined by people, mostly Zcash D and now Zebra D implementers. And then eventually a zip is finalized, which includes the list of the zips that comprise the network upgrade, and it's finalized when it activates on mainnet. It doesn't have to be encoded in the zip process that way. It could be this sort of a different avenue that is like explicitly and transparently choosing the zips that go into the network upgrade. And then that process, which may or may not involve zip editors because they've already done the zip editing of the zips that go into the network upgrade, eventually a zip will come out of that process and be like, okay, cool, this it's basically the same thing that happens now, but like that process becomes transparent and explicit, as opposed to sort of like it sort of happens somehow and then the next network upgrade happens. And now I have to leave. I'm very sorry.
I was going to say, I want to be very respectful of Deirdre's time. So thank you for that, for bringing those points up, Deirdre. And let's continue it in the zip and on the forums. We'll continue the discussion.
I was going to make one last point. So remember that the zip process is indirectly inspired by the RFC process.
Yeah.
And for a very long time, it was just John Postel who was sort of
May he rest in
RFC
peace.
editor, and that became more decentralized, but it also became a lot more bureaucratic. So balance between those.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll talk to you later. Bye.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye. All right. Okay. So, I mean, I think we covered everything. I've been trying to keep an eye on chat. I think we've pretty well got that taken care of. There was a question about how to submit a zip from Addy. And yeah, it's the Zcash zips repo, which is already public. So yeah, just create a new zip there. And,
and if you go to the zip guide, which is sort of at the bottom of zips.zcash, then you will see an example that you can use as a template. Go on, Nathan.
Yeah, it's just that some people who are interested in zips don't know much about GitHub at all. And so I think that's kind of a barrier. And like Dara was saying, we need to point them to the guide and help streamline that process as much as possible.
Oh, okay, good point. Yeah, Strad just put the link in there to the guide.
I just noted that the zip guide does not actually link to the GitHub repo where you can submit things. It links to the pull request that added the guide, but you can tweak some things there.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll take that as a to-do to get that cleaned up a bit. Maybe make it a little bit more clear.
And another thing that we could do there is we could use the issues in the zips repo as a landing point for individuals who are interested to construct a zip but don't really know anything about the GitHub process. If they produce an issue, then somebody can help guide them through the process.
Yeah.
Right. True. Okay. Well, I believe that's all. Go ahead, Nathan.
Oh, Walter Karshot said they wanted to see more software engineering documentation between like zips and just code and PRs and issues. So like design docs, architecture docs, and so forth. I really like that idea. And also that ties into differences maybe between the implementations. So I know that Zebra it has a book that is sort of an overview of the design. And they also have RFCs for large scale changes, and they're updating those as they go. For Zcash D, we have a mixture of code that we inherited from Bitcoin and then code we're working on. And I do think we could improve documentation with to have more like, here's an overview of the code base and how it's designed and the big moving parts. So I'd like to see that too.
Yep.
Okay.
All right. Yep. Great suggestion. Okay. I think we're pretty well. Yeah. And Walter's comment can contribute to templates and expected docs and the actual tedium. That's, if I understand that correctly, that's a very good point, right? At some point, if you want to get involved in Zcash development, it's like, okay, there's a requisite knowledge of like GitHub to do a zip or the zip process, and then of obviously development, but there's a lot of expertise in the community on, these type documents that were just described that we could get help, from the community on, which would be great.
Yeah, like a good place to come for that, and I can actually, if I can figure out how to get the right link. Come on, let me. Where is it?
So
create invite. That's what I want.
Discord.
Yes, that's exactly what I was attempting to do. Generate a new link. Copy. So yeah, come hang out in this channel. It's a link to the public community dev channel on the Zcash community forum. That's a good place to like find on Discord if you want to just like chat to someone about, hey, I want to contribute in this way. Come talk to us there.
Also,
right.
Some of the docs that are currently internal and on Confluence should be made public.
Right. Yep, and Walter's comment, a zip and related proposal that has no detailed spec and implementation plan is not complete to consider improved. And actually what we're kind of talking about in the nub is if it's not just the plan, if you don't have it implemented, it's not ready to be approved. So yeah, it definitely has to be implemented.
Yeah, the way we've gone with this in the past is that it's okay for a zip to not be completely finished at the time we consider it for inclusion in a network upgrade, but it has to be complete with sufficient detail, and we're now saying with the sufficient implementation to prove that it is feasible for us to actually get it finished and into an upgrade. So the more complete it is and the more full-featured an implementation is, the easier and more likely it is that it can be considered. And conversely, an idea that we're like, oh, we love this idea, but we don't have the engineering bandwidth to work on it. So.
Right. And one huge facilitator of that, I saw Marshall had posted it earlier in the chat is the testnet in a box work that DevInfra did. So there's not just, you know, a single Zcash testnet to kind of force everyone through. You can spin up your own testnet and have it running there, and that would be, you know, that would be considered an implementation running on a testnet.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have to go soon.
Okay, yeah, I think we're about to wrap up anyway, unless anyone has any other comments or anything. Yep, I'd like to thank everyone on the call. Great discussion. This is exactly what we intended these calls for. So I really, really like it. It's not only is it evolving the protocol, you know, technically, like what are we doing, but how do we evolve the protocol, which is it's been a great discussion today. So thanks everyone for that. I'll get the recording once it processes and post that for the folks that couldn't make it. And I know they'll all be super pleased with that. So thanks everyone for agreeing to start recording these for folks. So everyone have a good rest of the day wherever you're at, and a good rest of the week.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good morning.